welcome to the NerdSpace Dungeon Master's Guide. I'm your host Daniel, and in this series we'll be looking at the tips, tricks and information you need to become a better Dungeon Master. In this episode we'll look at what a Dungeon Master is and does. In its simplest definition, a DM, or Dungeon Master, is the person who runs a game of D&D for the players. While most of the content in this podcast will be focused around D&D, the advice will be general enough to be applicable to all tabletop RPGs, I hope. I've been playing and running tabletop RPGs for about 10 years. When I started, the only knowledge I had of them was from playing Baldur's Gate and Neverwinter Nights on the PC. I mostly play D&D now, but have dabbled in a wide range of games over my time playing. And because I didn't have any experience with RPGs when I started, I spent a lot of time reading about how to be a good DM online. And it was clear from what I was reading that the same questions and answers kept popping up. With that in mind, through this series, I want to share with you the tips, hints, answers and advice that I've gathered through my experiences and through trawling the internet. So without further ado, we should get to answering our first question, which is, what is a DM? In some ways we've already answered this. DM stands for Dungeon Master, and they're the person that runs a session of D&D for the players. But what does this involve? And it's an important question to ask. If you don't know the breadth of what's involved in being a DM, and therefore neglecting an aspect of your role, the game as a whole suffers for you and your players. We'll go over some of these roles in more detail in later podcasts, but for now we'll just go through the list to get an overview. First up, most people probably immediately think of a DM as the rules guy. As the DM, you will need to be the rules adjudicator for the game. This doesn't mean you have to memorize the player's handbook perfectly before you start playing. It doesn't even mean that you need to be the most rule-savvy person at the table. What it does mean, however, is that you need to be ready to make a judgment on the rules. And this isn't like Magic the Gathering, where there are strict, lawyer-like rulings. You need to be able to interpret the rules, patch the rules, and dare I say, break the rules sometimes for the sake of the game. The other primary role that you will have as a DM is to be the narrator. If you think of a session of D&D as a movie or a play, then the players are the protagonists and provide the heroic dialogue. The spotlight must be on them as they go from scene to scene, and the player chronicles their triumphs and their failures. Your role then, as the DM, is to set the scene. Like a good narrator, you stand off to the side and give context for the player's actions. You also need to build the set around the players, sometimes on the fly. This can be very hard to do, and we'll discuss some techniques on how to do this effectively in a later podcast. In the interest of keeping the theme of a performance, you will not only be the narrator, but the director. By that I mean that it's your task to give the game momentum, keep it on track and make it exciting. If a fight scene is dragging on, end it. If 3/4 of your play has been about the heroes preparing to go out on an adventure, move on. Use time lapses, skip over the boring bits, be a good director. What you must never do, however, is become the script writer. Your players decide which scenes go where and figure out how they play out, whether it's a triumph or a success. We'll talk about player agency in a later podcast, but for now it's useful to remember that they write the script and you make it work. Now I want to think about the social aspects of being a DM. This part of being a DM is often ignored or forgotten, but can be just as vital to a good game of D&D as any other part of your role is. You will need to be a social organizer and administrator. 9 times out of 10 it will fall into your lap to get everybody together at the same place and at the same time. This can be harder than you would think. Organizing people can be as frustrating as trying to herd cats, but without you filling that role, a campaign can fail very quickly. You are often also called on to mediate disputes between players within the game. If the player who's memorized the whole book is having an argument with the player that only operates on the rule of cool, you're probably the one that will need to step in and sort things out. Groups will often fail because people aren't willing to talk to one another and sort out whatever is nagging them, so you may need to sit someone down and have an honest chat with them for the good of the game. But above all these other roles, the role of the DM is to make the game fun. Your number one rule for when you run a game of D&D is to make sure that it's fun. And if you're not having fun, the rest of the table probably isn't either. If you know the rules back to front, are amazing at setting the scene, and keeping the pace up, and can do everything else perfectly, but your players aren't having fun, you failed as a DM. And fun is contagious. So my advice to you, particularly if you've never DM'd a game before, is to go be a DM and have fun. The second question I want to answer is, what do I need to DM? If you're underprepared and don't have everything that you need when you begin to play, it slows the game down and gets things off to a boring start. Spending 20 minutes trying to find pencils and paper is a waste of your time, and you're wasting your player's time. So, the first thing that you need to know is that you will need to provide for you and for your entire table. Don't rely on your players to bring anything of their own. Be prepared for people to turn up with nothing at all. So, the number one thing is to bring pencils and paper. Nearly everything else is useful, but can be dispensable. But if you don't have pencils and something to write on, then you're going to have a bad time. And bring heaps of pencils as well, at least one for you and each player. And also bring heaps of erasers, enough for the whole table. If you're in a pinch and you need to use pens, you can, but because the numbers on the sheets are going to be changing pretty regularly, it'll look rather messy by the end of the session when you have to keep on writing things down and scribbling them out. Better than bringing blank pieces of paper, however, is bringing character sheets. Again, remembering that you're providing for the whole table, bring lots of them, more than enough for every player. Also, I'd recommend bringing pre-generated character sheets. You may have an unexpected player turn up, or a new player might come along who's never built a character before, in which case having a pre-gen is very useful, and it won't hold up the game while everyone else waits for someone to finish building a character. Bring lots of dice as well. Ideally, you should have enough to give a complete set to every player, and have enough left over for yourself as well. You will use more dice than you expect, so bring heaps. Players don't like waiting around while you roll the same dice 10 times over. The next thing that you'll need is a DM screen. This is a screen that you put up on the table to block your notes and dice rolls from the rest of the table. We'll talk about when, why, and how to cheat as a DM in a later podcast, but for now, just realize that it is an essential tool. The great thing is that you can put notes on your screen, so make sure that you have all the notes that you need. If you always forget that one rule, or find yourself looking up one table in the books repeatedly, stick it up on your screen, customize it to fit yourself. Also, you should bring a notepad. I use my notepad regularly to keep track of the hit points of non-player characters, take notes on actions that players have taken that will have later consequences, and I use it to pass secret notes to players as well. Have it handy sitting beside you, and use it whenever you can. It will help. You will also need the core rulebooks with you. Now, in this case, digital copies will work, but they're often cumbersome to flip through to go from one section to another. I'd highly recommend getting a physical copy of them. I'd also recommend that you ask the players to buy a copy of the Player's Handbook as well for themselves, even if it's only one copy for them to share around. Oftentimes, both you and a player will need to look at the book at the same time, and it slows things down if you're having to pass it back and forth. Another great thing to bring along are maps and visual aids. They can be as detailed or vague as you like, but they really assist in being able to describe things accurately to your players, which can really make a difference in their own imaginations. Also, think about bringing things to set the mood that you want. Lighting a candle on the table can be a really great way to create a mood for a horror scene. Music is also perfect for creating the particular mood that you're going for. Before, I've used a cauldron with incense in it that worked really well. Small touches like this can really focus the players on the game, and they can also be used to signal when the game is beginning and when it's ending. Finally, a real godsend can be having digital aids. Having a digitally searchable spell list, for instance, can save minutes of flicking through the book. Tailor what digital things you bring to what your needs are, but definitely have a look around online and on the app stores. And that's it for this episode. Next time on the Dungeon Master's Guide, we'll look at what you need to get ready for your first session. So listen in next time for the Dungeon Master's Guide. I've been your host, Daniel McNeil.